Good morning. The crows have arrived this beautiful Oklahoma sunrise morning. Thank you for being with me. I appreciate you. I continue with our book, The Western Women's Reader, the remarkable writings of women who shaped the American West, spanning 300 years. Today I read about Barbara Kingsolver, born 1955, but there is no death date. Hang on, let me get a little drink. I may or may not have been rebel-rousing last night. My voice is a little less cheerio. Barbara Kingsolver was born in Kentucky in 1955 and has worked as a teacher, scientific writer, and journalist. Her first novel, The Bean Trees, 1988, won critical acclaim, but when she moved to Arizona, she was still unsure of her future as a novelist. In Tucson, her day job was as a scientific writer, and then in 1983, as a freelance journalist. She was sent to cover a constellation of small, strike-gripped mining towns strung out across southern Arizona, where workers were locked in a struggle with Phelps Dodge. She spent the summer taping interviews with about 75 people, mostly Latina women. I listened for more than a year to the stories of striking miners and their stunning, courageous wives, sisters, daughters. Sometimes I had to visit them in jail. For 18 months, the strike was carried on by the women, as husbands and fathers traveled as far as Texas and California to keep their families fed. Kingsolver's account of the Latinas who held the line against a multinational corporate giant is an intimate and thoroughly exceptional portrait of the labor movement in America. Okay. Her novels, The Poisonwood Bible, 1998, Animal Dreams, 1990, and Pigs in Heaven, 1993, Stories, Homeland, 1989, and essays, High Tide in Tucson, To Find Her Way in the World. Oh, wait a minute. The other essay is Tell of Women, Native American, Latina, Anglo, Trying to Find Their Way in the World. And this one is also italicized. Another America, Auta America, OTRA, 1992. Her work has won a Los Angeles Times Book Award for Fiction and an Edward Abbey Eco-Fiction Award in recognition of her concerns for the land. All right, now we begin reading her writings. This is by Barbara Kingsolver from Holding the Line, Women in the Great Arizona Mine Strike of 1983. It was written in 1989. Women in the Great Arizona Mine Strike of 1983. All the people and events in this book are real. In a few cases, I've changed names to protect safety or family harmony. In those instances, I've used a first name only. I also changed the name of the woman identified as Flossie Navarro at her request. After a long and remarkable life as a trendsetter in the Morenci mine and in her town, she still demurred from direct publicity. All others who speak here are identified by name. I've sometimes edited their narratives for brevity, but have dedicated my efforts to retaining the letter and spirit of their testimonies, mixed metaphors and all. When it came to reconstructing the strike in the form of a book, I found there were two different kinds of truth I was after: human and historical. Many of the stories here are personal, describing an internal landscape. Sometimes the most important events were not, and then they threw me in jail, but rather, for the first time, I realized if newspapers are lying about us, they could be lying about places like the Middle East and Nicaragua. Sometimes I found it best to shut my mouth and record what I heard, trusting the integrity of my sources as the most credible witnesses to their own metamorphoses. Even so, I knew these personal truths would mean more if I placed them into an accounting of the historical facts of the strike. Just the facts, pure and simple. Given the unbelievable parameters of this story, I wanted to grant readers the confidence that they were reading actual history, not speculation. Pure enough a task, but not so simple as it turned out. Sorting fact from fiction was a test of wit, nerve, and a writer's endurance. Tales ran rampant on both sides of the picket line, and while all of them would have made good copy, many of them simply had to be untrue. A typical example: during one of the showdowns between strikers and the police, a strike supporter named Alice, who was in her 9th month of pregnancy, became trapped inside a small store she owned. Riot police threw tear gas through her storefront window, entered the store, arrested her, and dragged her onto the bus that was being used as a paddy wagon. This much I witnessed before I was forced to leave the scene. Finding out what happened next took me through a maze of testimonies sworn on many a stack of Bibles. Some people told me she was beaten on the bus and went into labor on the spot. Some said she gave birth to a brain-damaged boy a few hours later, and that her doctor, a renowned strike supporter, vowed to sue Phelps Dodge. Some said the police let her out of the bus as soon as they realized she was pregnant, while others insisted that she was held in custody. When I asked Alice herself, she put her head in her hands and said, "I don't want to talk about it." I couldn't blame her. The story I eventually put together from accounts by the doctor who attended the birth, several of Alice's friends, witnesses on the bus, arrest records, and a local police officer was this one. Alice was gassed in her store abruptly, questioned, handcuffed, put into the bus, let out a little while later, and detained overnight in the home of a police officer. 2 days later, she gave birth to a boy who developed meningitis, but recovered fully. So all of the tales contained a bit of the real story, but only a bit. Collecting rumors and trying to assemble truth, I sometimes felt like the foolish heroine of the Rumpelstiltskin story, whose brash confidence got her into the job of trying to spin straw into gold. I became obsessed with verification because as the strike wore on, the truth was shocking enough without embroidery. In this book, I have attempted to make a clear distinction between interviewees, hyperbole, and the events I was able to verify, even when I was there myself to watch, sometimes through a haze of gas. I gathered as many independent accounts as possible, including the official version in state newspapers, which occasionally was the wildest fiction of all. I applied my training as a scientist, looking for replication of sequence and detail among the stories. I learned a great deal about this thing we casually call the truth. I humbly offer the reader a story that really happened. It is too cold, and I may or may not have left my regular thing at my house. So here we are playing Help Me Lord together as a team. So thanks for being here. Help me, Lord. Oh my word. That's what I get for moving it. That's what I get. That's right. That's how you learn things. Still move it, Crystal. Okay, come on, baby. So close. So close. Come on. I apologize for if anyone is feeling nauseous from my... We're going to accept that today. I know that it's crooked. That's that we were about to miss the sun. So it's like, we have to make choices, friends. Go back a little bit. There we go. It's just crooked as it can be. Okay, well. All right. I don't know, that was kind of dizzying for me, but thanks for staying with me as we went through that together. Oh, lordy, lordy. Where the heck was I? Over here somewhere. I learned a great deal about this thing we casually call the truth. I humbly offer the reader a story that really happened. Since completing this book, I have plied my trade mainly as a writer of fiction. Many people have asked me, since I appear to possess the skills of prevarication, why I didn't cast the story of Holding the Line as a novel rather than a work of non-fiction. A lot more people would read it, they tell me, and they are probably right. And yet, as it stands, this story contains all the elements of a novel: lively characters, conflict, plot, resolution, even metaphor and imagery. When I submitted an early draft to a publisher with no preface explaining my methods, the editors returned it saying, "We like this a lot, but sorry, we don't publish novels." Very well then. It is novelesque, and if people would sooner read the very same story under the heading Once Upon a Time than the one that begins, "Listen, this really happened," then why not give them the novel? The wind is crazy here, my friends. I'll try this one more. Warning, I'm gonna move this again. You see that cloud? It's unreal. It's so beautiful. And for some reason, all the things that I've tried to prop up against this have completely failed me. Oh, there we go. There we go. Oh, come back. Do I have any more green things? Which I do. Okay, there we go. It's so beautiful. All right. There we go. Hallelujah. All right. Listen, this really happened. Then why not give them the novel? That it really happened is exactly the point. And that's why not. I believe the most important thing about this story is that it is true. In a place a few hours' drive from where I live, the government, the police, and a mining company formed a conspicuous partnership to break the lives of people standing together for what they thought was right. That ironclad, steel-toed partnership arrested hundreds of citizens on charges so ludicrous that the state, after having perfectly executed its plan of intimidating the leadership and turning public sympathy against the strikers, quietly dropped every case. When I began to tell people what happened during the strike of '83, it often happens that they stop me and say, That was 1883, right? No, it was barely more than a decade ago, right here in the United States of America. Ronald Reagan was president. Michael Jackson's Thriller was on the radio. People who got crushed for organizing unions were thought to live in fantasy, faraway lands like Poland and South Africa. This was the land of the free and the home of the brave. U.S. citizens had so much confidence in law enforcement, they merrily went along with the rallying cry of "More police" as an answer to most social ills. They would barely blink when the U.S. Attorney General declared that innocent people don't get arrested in America. A novel, at its best, sheds insight on life, but the reader may choose to take her. A novel at its best sheds insight on life, but the reader may choose to take or leave its lessons. I would like in this case to narrow that choice, and so that it is not a novel. It is a cautionary tale. Its lesson is, watch your back, America. Take civil liberty for granted at your own risk. Trust in leaders who arrive into power by means of wealth, and see what they protect when push comes to shove. What happened to Arizona could happen again, and it will. Somewhere, to someone. It will happen again and again if we do not open our eyes and believe what we see. This story's other lesson is hope. This story's other lesson is hope. If a group of people who describes themselves as nobody really, just some housewives, could endure so much without breaking, if they could bear the meanness of their nation without becoming mean-spirited themselves, if they could come away with a passion for justice instead of revenge, then ordinary people are better than they are generally thought to be. That all this, too, really happened is extremely important. I did not invent these women. They invented themselves. What happened to them could happen to you or me, and perhaps sometime it will. For better and for worse, this is a story of what could become of us. All right, here's the first one, titled The Women. The story could begin on the day Flossie Navarro sashayed into the mine on the wind of World War II, or it could begin much earlier than that. In every season since the Earth's face was opened for dredging, women have worked in mines, and they have fought for the safety and survival of miners. And always it wasn't exactly supposed to be that way. The hostility Flossie stirred as a miner still persists in Arizona's copper pits and is a traditional probability as old as mining itself, rooted in the mineral-rich soils of the Andes, where the Incas opened mines before European ships ever touched the Americas' shores. The keepers of these ancient Andean mines in the Bolivian Altiplano have always described their world as two separate domains, one above ground and one underneath. A benevolent, matronly earth goddess oversees growing crops and family life. But the stony underground world carved out by miners seeking copper, tin, and silver, that is the devil's domain. The devil's name is Supe, and he has ruled miners' lives from the underneath. The devil's name is Supe, and he has ruled miners' lives from underneath their floors since before the Spanish conquest. When the mine shafts rumble and threaten to collapse, Bolivian miners assume it is Supe, begrudging the ore they tap, little by little, from his glittering black veins. In the heart of Bolivia's mountainous mining region, the mining town of Oruro was the ancient ceremonial center for the Incas. High priests claimed to travel from Peru through tunnels, passing secretly under the core of the Andes, and in full ceremonial dress, they leaped out of the ground in Oruro. Now the tunnel's mouth is blocked with boulders, but festivals still celebrate the powers of Supe. During the week of Carnival, devil dancers in red-tipped shoes and horned masks jam the streets in a wild procession leading to the church of the mine shaft. The festivities end with a ceremonial offering to Supe, held deep in the mine, where women can't go. The devil's domain is masculine. On carnival days and on every working day of the year. Now, women in Bolivia may earn subsistence wages by picking through the slag heaps for overlooked bits of ore, but the central economic pursuit of the region, mining, is closed to them. Tradition holds that a female presence in this special corner of hell would anger Supe terribly and cause a cave-in. If a woman went into the mines, the miners say disaster would certainly follow. In the open pit mine in Morenci, Arizona, a steadily grazing herd of mechanized shovels raises a yellow haze of fine dust. This is the most productive copper mine in North America. In the best of years, it has yielded nearly 300,000 tons of metal. Clearly, this is the domain of both devil and dollar. The copper smelter's 2 smokestacks rise like a pair of giant horns out of the mountain's granite pate. Could be pate. Below the horned promontory lies the pit. The earth's entrails are laid open there in a pattern of descending steps that expose the strange, delicate colors of a mountain's insides: lavender, pink, blue, gray. If the miners labor here in the belly of a beast, gutting it more deeply every day, then that beast is as tough as Prometheus, the thief in Greek mythology, whose punishment was to be disemboweled every day for eternity. Morency's miners, grandfathers, fathers, and sons, have worked this same scarred landscape for more than half a century. Around the mine and in the river valley below it lie the ordinary mining towns of Morency and Clifton. Each of the two small towns has its high school, its main drag, its dust-coated bouquet of blinking neon signs, its sundry handful of bars and drive-in restaurants. No devil dances for carnival in these streets, but even so, the germinal social order of Suppé's domain seems to hold sway over all that has come after. A mine is a masculine enclave, not just in the Andes. The exact same social prescriptions surface whenever the earth is scratched. Flossie Navarro heard constantly that female workers would jinx the mine. When women began working the Appalachian coal mines in the late 1970s, they confronted a centuries-old folk belief that a woman underground was bad luck and could cause a cave-in merely by her presence. Who could blame miners for an excessive interest in bad luck? With or without a woman's presence, to mine ore is to flirt with disaster. Between 1961 and 1973, for example, years when most of us held an anxious eye on a perilous occupation overseas, more than 500,000 disabling injuries happened in U.S. mines. That's nearly twice as many as befell all U.S. soldiers in Vietnam. The 1,080 per million, and for active duty personnel, about 1,270 per million. These figures are from the National Safety Council and Department of Defense information, respectively. If war is hell, so is mining. Underground shafts collapse. Smelter furnaces explode. Lung disease is endemic. In few other professions are the odds so stacked against living long enough to retire. And then a large ... When Eastern investors in the Phelps Dodge Corporation began to develop a profitable copper industry in the Southwest just after the turn of the century, the anti-alien laws they constructed were as utilitarian and malleable as the metal itself. For example, at the Copper Queen mine in Bisbee, Arizona, underground shafts reached precious deposits of silver and gold. and mining was regarded as a skilled, well-paying craft. Mexicans were explicitly forbidden to work underground. But in other Arizona mines where geology called for different methods and attitudes, the rules changed. In the Clifton-Morenci district, the open pit mine required an immense unskilled labor force. In contrast to all the European Bisbee mine, Morenci mine records from 1917. All right, I'm going to try this sentence again. It has so many words in it. Hang on. Go back up here. But in other Arizona mines where geology called for different methods and attitudes, the rules changed. In the Clifton-Morenci district, the open pit mine required an immense, unskilled labor force. In contrast to the European Bisbee mine, Morenci mine records from 1917 describe a work camp that was 80% Mexicans, 15% Spaniards and Italians, and only 5% whites, meaning European Anglo-Saxons. Workers for the Morenci operation were imported from Mexico en masse. These laborers were regarded as beasts of burden and paid only slightly better than the average mule, even though their descendants say that many who crossed the border from Sonora were skilled miners and smelters. The Manoros from the south brought more than strong backs. Outside the mining museum at Jerome, Arizona, sits an old Chilean wheel, an efficient ore crushing technology that was used extensively in Latin America before being introduced into Arizona, probably by Mexican miners. Their stories have been lost in the main, but their knowledge enriched the industry. And another ... We are on page 425. Separated by a world of mountain and desert, the women of these desperate towns carried a single flag into battle when the time came. Nearly every one of them spoke of a grandfather who had walked out of the Morenci mine in 1915 or left Bisbee by cattle car in 1917, or a father who struggled for a decent life while bearing discrimination like a scar. The threat to their standard of living was not just personally dangerous. They saw it as an insult to their ancestors. These tiny, isolated towns have steeped for half a century in their own labor traditions and extracted a sense of pride that provides their only medicine against hard times. Even for those women who weren't miners themselves, the union they'd grown up with was a tool as familiar to them as a can opener or a stove. They knew exactly where they would be without it. Living in Tortilla Flats or Indian Town, barred from the social club, the library, and the swimming pool. Living with husbands who broke their backs and spirits for half a white man's wage. regardless of age or color. They'd be women, living with prospects no higher than car hop and laundromat. Women working against the odds. Women damned as bad luck in a devil's domain. They marched for the Union because they knew in their bones a Union banner was the only curtain between themselves and humiliation. Being cursed by scabs or the National Guard is a lesser evil by far than the curse of a father's ghost. ... This one's titled The Strike. Something's going to happen. They're taking in mattresses and taking in food, so we'd better have some people up there. Carmina Garcia went. Her husband, Willie, was away for the morning, so she called her friend Jessie and Valia, the mayor's wife. We went around the side to check the Columbine gate and saw that the trucks were coming in and out through the back, bringing in food, cots, and whatnot. Then they told us there were more people going through the main gate, so we went to the main road, and there we saw the people were coming in buses. They were scared to come to work. Don't you see? They shouldn't have been working. There was a strike. So PD hired those buses to bring in the scabs from Safford and even a few from Clifton. They would stop and pick them up and drive them around back. We had to put a stop to it. People from Duncan, Safford, everywhere were coming in to help us close it down. They said in the papers there were 1,000 or 2,000, but it was more than that. I know. As time went on, you started seeing a little bit more and a little bit more. And PD was bringing in stuff left and right. The helicopter was coming in with food because a lot of them were going to stay in the mine once they got in. PD was telling them, "They're going to kill you. I know this because there was a guy working in there that my husband and I know real well. Later on, he quit. He told us that his foreman told him, 'Here, go kill those sons of bitches. Look at that mob. They're going to kill you anyway,' and threw a gun in his truck. David didn't want it. He threw it out of his truck and left it there. But they were trying to get everybody scared. We weren't going to kill them, honey. All we were asking for them to get out of there. That's all we ever asked." Berta Chavez and her sisters were there, of course. Berta was up above the mine. We could look down into the mine where the scabs were. They had their hats over their faces. I guess they were afraid because we had control, and they'd come in disguises. One guy came in with a paper sack over his head with holes cut for the eyes. They were ashamed because they knew they shouldn't be in there scabbing for PD. PD is Phelps Dodge. Outside, there were people from the mine gate all the way to the general office. It was full of people, a couple of thousand, I'd say. We had our trucks there. We backed them up, and we had our beer and our ice chests. It was just like a picnic. We were just waiting. We gave them till 12 to get the scabs out. We said after 12, nobody comes in or out. ... News of the Morenci shutdown crossed the state in record time. Janie Ramon The first woman in the Esho mine was now reporting secretary for her union, the International Chemical Workers Union, Local 703. She took it upon herself to try and stir up some resistance to Phelps Dodge in Ojo. Or Ajo. I mean, it's A-J-O. I don't really know how you say it. Ajo. I met Janie several weeks later in the Ajo Union Hall, a mobile home equipped with a few chairs and a rickety aluminum table, an ancient coffee machine, and a TV. On August 8, when things started happening in Morenci, Janie said, rapping her knuckles precariously against the table, the strikers up there claimed we didn't have any courage, that we were meek little mice. I was with a girlfriend and my boyfriend that day, and the three of us went around to the Ejo bars to tell people what we were doing on the line. There were a lot of scabs in some of the bars, but I thought if I talked to them and told them what harm they were doing the union, it might make them change their minds. But they weren't having anything to do with me. We ended up getting into a fight, so we left. The next day, August 9, was when the woman blocked traffic at the mine gate. The men she said, were away from the gates trying to stop individual cars. Everyone had bats, but no one used them. We didn't hurt anybody. We were there again the next day. I was on the side gate. All of a sudden, 6 cars pulled up and a driver got out of every car with a machine gun, an M16. That was ridiculous. Not one of us had any weapon. Gloria Blase was also terminated for alleged strike-related misconduct. I was supposedly carrying a wrench. I wasn't. It was a crowbar that I picked up and put in my truck. I wanted to correct them, so I went to see the films at the general office. Because the company couldn't legally fire strikers without cause, Phelps Dodge kept a file of films documenting activities for which they were being terminated. When Gloria viewed the films, she realized she wasn't in the cast. On the day for which her warrant had been issued, she wasn't even on the line. She had witnesses and decided to fight the termination. 74 other strikers in Ojo were fired and ordered to vacate their company-owned homes during the next weeks. 11 Ajo strikers, including Janie, were arrested on charges of rioting, obstructing traffic, or interfering with the judicial process. C. Pat Scanlon, Vice President of Finance for the Phelps Dodge Corporation, felt that, on balance, the firings were good for the company. We discharged through Arizona 188 of the strikers for strike-related misconduct, he commented later. Our perception of that group is that in general, it included a lot of the less desirable employees that were working, either because they were general troublemakers, or unreliable, or drunks, or whatever. So, it had the effect of purging the workforce of a lot of people who were not really on the company's side. So, in that respect, we upgraded the workforce. Solya Baum is the very first arrest of the strike. Was jailed for using her telephone to tell a former friend that she now considered him a scab. Those arrested were booked into the Ajo Annex of the Pima County Jail, but most were later moved to a jail in Tucson. For the 3-hour drive, they sat handcuffed in the back of a van without water or air conditioning. The arrests were a shock, and the extremely high bonds set up to $20,000. Bankrupted union coffers overnight. Union attorney Dwayne Ice reported that the unions planned to fight back and would seek jury trials. Years later, Soya and every one of the others would be vindicated by appalled juries. But at the time, and in the months to come, being legally in the right did them no more good than if they had been pedestrians run down in a crosswalk. And the next section is titled The Governor. Since Arizona's population is primarily urban, the majority of the governor's constituents couldn't easily relate to the inhabitants of a remote blue-collar mining towns, and were probably inclined to distrust the bred-in-bone union loyalty that led the strikers to seemingly desperate measures. But the people of Clifton and Morenci saw Governor Bruce Babbitt's first obligation, a frightening military occupation of their town, as excessive. The punishment didn't fit the crime. They felt that the anti-assembly injunctions had been unfairly invoked in the first place. What they saw more than anything was a clear alliance between their governor, the troops, and Phelps Dodge. When the mine gates reopened on August 19, National Guardsmen were lined up on Phelps Dodge property, guns pointing out. Patrolling activity was stepped up for the shift changes when, after the 10-day cooling off period, Phelps Dodge again began bringing busloads of non-strikers in and out of the mine. When Phelps Dodge reopened the employment office, armed National Guardsmen were standing on the roof. The sensation of being stared at through a rifle scope is unsettling, to say the least. When strikers and their families walked the picket lines, uniformed sharpshooters followed their movements with automatic weapons. Strike sympathy still ran high in the town, and the memory of the shutdown, the astonishing power of their numbers, was fresh in the strikers' minds, but they reluctantly came to understand as many have learned before them, that a majority opinion means nothing against guns. Trudy Morgan, the wife of a striking miner, summed up the town's emotions. I felt defeated, just lost. I think we all felt that way. I have to say our town was raped. Flossie Navarro's memories of the occupation are vivid. Having survived clamorous days as a Union miner during World War II and after, she never expected to see the same battles fought again, like a rerun of an old war film. In her retirement, she didn't care for the show. I was here when the National Guard came in. Yes, ma'am. I saw them helicopters come in. We had 18 up here in the air. 18 helicopters. We went out there in the yard, and I counted them as they went over. They circled and circled. It was just like a battle. You'd just like to have got a gun and shot them all down. That's really what I'd like to have done. All night you'd hear them. Brr, brr, brr. Like they was taking the top of the house off. At night and of a day for the 3 o'clock shift change. And of a morning, when the early morning shift was coming up, them helicopters would wake you up. Here they'd come. It was as bad as during the war, when those planes would come down drilling. That's just what it put me in mind of, just like war. When those National Guard were here, I kept the grandkids right with me every minute, because there was no telling what was going to happen to them. One time we went up Old Chase Creek to the fruit stand up there. While we was there at the truck stop, there was a cop car come down, one of those DPS, and there was 6 of them in that sucker. They stopped right over here and got out. They took off their shirts and put on those bulletproof vests. Then they got in the car and come on down the highway. Right there, ignorantly, in front of us. I didn't say anything to them, but I sure would have liked to. But I was just one woman there. They probably would have beat the hell out of me. Now, why couldn't they have done that in the motel room up in Morenci? At least I have the guts to drive through town without no bulletproof vest. They was all over the place, all up the road and on top of the stores, pointing their guns down at people like it was a battle. They had all their jeeps, whatever you call them, and those old stupid-looking outfits. At the lines, they'd have 4 or 5 of them ganged up on one striker. That's not fair, is it? Why didn't they take them man to man? Why didn't they give them both a gun? Stand them up there and let them go at it. If it was a war they wanted... Jean Lopez spent her entire childhood in sight of the smokestacks of the Morenci smelter. The governor sent the National Guard in so that Phelps Dodge could open the plant without any incident. It was as simple as that. People knew it wasn't just an ordinary strike, and they were scared. The newspaper said they were being trained up here. the National Guard Armory in Safford, practicing their whatever it is they have to practice. It just wasn't necessary. These people all grew up here. You know, the people here, they're not bad people. I was so angry when I saw all these guys here. And we pay for that with our tax money. I called Governor Rabbit. I called Governor Babbitt. And I told him I do not appreciate that he sent these people up here against us and with my taxes and paying for them to threaten me and my people. Oh, I say that's wrong. Oh, I was angry that our own country would turn our own people against us. A lot of these strikers are Vietnam vets. They fought for this country. For what? I had an uncle who got killed in Vietnam. It just doesn't make any sense to me. This is an American against an American. That didn't seem like it should be happening here. These are horror stories you hear from somewhere else, like South America, Poland, or someplace, but not here, not in the United States. We like to think we're better off, you know, patriotism and all of that. I'm not saying I'm not glad I am an American, but at this moment, I don't feel that I'm 100%. I'm sorry. That's the way it is. Fina Roman, head of the Women's Auxiliary, expressed similar doubts about truth, justice, and the American way. I think this has been a learning process for us. We have always been proud of our country and believed in the democratic system. Try to imagine the disappointment of having had such faith in that system that's turning against us now. We taught our children that if you do right and don't break the laws, the system in place is your defense. You can't lose if you work within that system. You can defend what you think is right, but not be punished for it. But we have been punished, and that's been damaging to the values we tried to instill. This town has been here over 100 years. And for all that time, we have been law-abiding citizens who raised our children, supported our town, and produced many valuable, worthwhile human beings. All of a sudden, as soon as we stand to defend what we believe is right, they call us law-breaking animals. Fina confided these thoughts one evening as we sat in the machinist's hall in Clifton, after she had spent a long afternoon standing on the picket line and trying to organize some emergency relief for a striker family with 5 kids in danger of having their home foreclosed. The huge, dimly lit hall, which ordinarily buzzed with people and projects as the nerve center of the strike, was nearly empty now as people went home to supper. Fina looked worried and tired. The greatest disappointment for me was that I campaigned for Governor Babbitt door to door. I thought he was the best thing that could happen to Arizona. Now I feel betrayed. He was a guest at our graduation in May of last year and applauded unions. 3 months later, he sent in troops to destroy them. We remember these things. It was such an excessive show of force. It's frightening. We're facing people armed with destructive weapons, and we don't know. Would they take our life? Our children are impressionable. They go out and taunt them, sometimes acting immature, thinking they're defending their parents, and one day they might overstep. She paused for a minute as 4 small girls in blue jeans, their long black hair flying, tore into the Union Hall and chased each other up the stairs, screaming and giggling. Fina asked me as if I knew, would these men shoot our kids away? People think about it every day. Would they shoot them for throwing a rock? We don't know. ... The occupation of Clifton and Morenci left indelible marks. The character of the strike and the tactics of its supporting organizations were forced to change. The Women's Auxiliary in particular hardened its core. According to Jean Lopez, the auxiliary used to be a group where the ladies would get together and air their complaints. She says it made them feel better to see that other families were in the same boat. You come feeling depressed and leave feeling great, and it was kind of a support group for the men. The women would get together and make tortillas to take to the picketers up on the mine, and parties for the children at Christmas, that kind of thing. This is basically what it was, but it changed. The women were forced to take a stand. We were always behind the lines, and the men were up in front. But in this strike, the women had to move to the front. Fina Roman explained how this had come about. Everybody was on the line at first, including the women. But the women are the ones who have never stayed away from it. Partly, this is because there was an injunction against the men, but also because it was very important to us to keep that picket line active. The men, after the injunction, were in danger of being arrested for just being there. The women took over. All right, we have a page and a half left. Thank you for being with me. ... And this is titled The Women. And so, in the face of considerable army, the women of Clifton and Morenci began rolling their groggy children out of bed at 4 a.m. and making their way in the pre-dawn light to the top of the hill. Most of them now grown, remembering the difficulty of organizing their households around this strange new schedule. Phelps Dodge's state of emergency, 12-hour shift change, but they also agree that the all-woman pickets were kind of fun. It had never been their habit to go anywhere but the grocery store without their husbands. Socializing spots like the bar were traditionally off limits to women alone or in groups, so the female camaraderie on the line was a heady discovery. The Women's Auxiliary received notice that it was technically barred from the lines along with the strikers because of its legal affiliation with the unions. Undaunted, the women organized under a new title, Citizens for Justice, and refused to stay home, carrying hand-painted signs that declared such things as, "Who is Governor? Phelps Dodge or Bruce Scabbett?" Housewives, waitresses, mothers, and daughters came out to the roadside to make the most public stand of their lives. "We had to try and keep the numbers down to 99, says Shirley Randall. "All women we knew couldn't just quit. We asked the men not to go, so they couldn't say we were doing anything wrong. The men were more rowdy, the rock throwers." This last point is debatable. Cleo Robledo said the opposite. "Oh, you better believe the women turned out, and oh, they were brave. The scabs, the DPS, all of them hate facing the women worse than they hate facing the men. Even if there were just 5, 7 women up there in that little tiny island, they call out the DPS, 'Oh yes, get them up here. We can't stand these women.' They were afraid of the women because I think we're much more verbal. Their verbs were sharply curtailed, though, by the presence of armed guards. When we were on the line," Diane McCormick said, "you really had to maintain. You couldn't be rowdy. You knew they were watching. I remember one time we were on the line and I looked up and said, 'They have snipers on the hill.' Everyone turned, and sure enough, they were all up there, right above the mine. There's a little shack up there. Always before we had just seen the guard and the DPS when they were right there near us. When I saw the snipers up there with their guns ready, I felt like, man, we don't have a chance. Don't do anything. I felt they would shoot us. I honestly did. That they wouldn't hesitate. ... For just innumerable years," Fina Roman says, "Clifton was a safe community. People knew everyone. Everyone looked after everyone else's children. There was just a family atmosphere throughout the community. Now, that no longer is true. Unfortunately, it isn't always those who have crossed the picket line, but the law enforcement agencies who are causing the problems. They are forever questioning people who they meet walking down the street. We are used to walking everywhere. It's a small community, and people enjoy walking. Now we're questioned when we are found walking. This is strange to us. I think an investigation has to be undertaken to find the reasons for our rights being violated. There is a right to work law in Arizona, but that doesn't mean that we must forfeit all other rights." The sentiment among strikers was the same everywhere. "We are going to see the end of this," Carmina Garcia declared. "Come hell or high water, the river can take us, but we're not giving in to Phelps Dodge. Whew. And for further readings would be Mary Jean DeMar, which is Barbara Kingsolver, A Critical Companion by Greenwood Publishing Group, 1999. Donna Perry, Back Talk, Women Writers Speak Out, interviews for the Rutgers University Press, 1993. Judy Olivet and Trudy Mills, titled Something Old, Something New. Another one, Feminist Studies, and Barbara Kingsolver and Jill Barrett Feen, Women on the Line, Progressive, from March 1984. Wow. Well, I look forward to listening to that one again, as I don't know. I don't understand how history can just recreate itself. I'm not I'm old, but I'm not that old for history to be repeating itself. I thought it took more years or something, you know. But I want to say thank you, and I appreciate you being with me today. Thank you very much. I promise that sun came up, and I'm frozen like a popsicle. Thank you again for being with me.